Welcome back to the Art of Boat Building. We're going to get started back on the Wood Duck 12 here. Now what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to get the coaming fit on the cockpit here. Now the coaming, the kit comes with 5 pieces. These pieces here are the spacers for the coaming, and they go on here like this. There's 2 pieces, so they get doubled up, so we end up with a thicker piece. And then on top of that goes the coaming lip that will go on here. Now what that does is it creates a lip on here so that when you have your paddling skirt, the skirting can go around that and tighten up. So what we're going to do first is we're going to get these pieces prepared and get the preliminary pieces glued together. So the first pieces we need to work with are these pieces that create that lip. And you can see that they are basically, all 4 pieces are the same one. Some are reversed over this way so that then they go together like this to make the opening for the cockpit. So the first order of business is to get 2 of these glued together, each one. And we're going to do that with some tight bond glue. So the first thing we'll do is just get them glued together. Now you may be questioning, why am I using tight bond instead of epoxy? So the entire thing is going to get epoxy and glass coated, so the glue will never see moisture. It's not any different than gluing strips on a kayak, where you use this very same glue. Always give it a little wiggle so it kind of sets itself, and then we'll just get this clamped together. And wipe up a little bit of the squeeze out here, so it'll be a little bit less to clean up later. Now what we'll do is I'm going to let these sit overnight and make sure that glue is cured good. And then once we do that, then we can take it over on the belt sander and clean it up and get these edges nice and true and cut off any little spots where there are some spots here where there are these little tabs from the manufacturing process that we'll be able to sand off of there. Okay, so that's that for there, and we'll come back in the morning and move on to the next step. So now that the glue has all set on the risers for the coaming here, what I need to do next is to trim them up a little bit so that they'll be nice and clean where the edges, where there's a little glue squeeze out, and also those little registration tabs that I had spoke of earlier. So the best way to clean these up will be on my belt sander, my stationary belt sander over here. So the next thing I want to do is to dry fit these risers on the kayak here, mainly so that I can get these two ends to meet properly. If I need to trim them up a little bit, I can do that. So I'm going to just put some clamps around here. At the front here, I can see that there's a little notch for the beginning of it. It's where I'm going to start. Good fit on the front. So the back spot needs a little bit of trim up. I can see right here, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it's overlapping a little bit right here. So this side can move in a little bit like that, and then that'll be closer to flush. So I can square up both of these ends and have those meet. Well, that's a nice clean fit now. So my next step now is to rough up this surface along here so that we'll have a good mechanical bond when I epoxy those risers down to the deck. After I got it sanded, I wiped it down with denatured alcohol. I've got some epoxy mixed up here, and I'm going to put a little filler in it so that this will stop it from sagging, because I'm going to apply it to the edges of the riser, and I don't really want it to sag very much. It also thickens it up a little bit. I've also put a piece of plastic in here so that if it does sag and drip, it won't get into the cockpit. Now, this does make the epoxy a bit milky colored, but for the most part, if you're wanting to keep a bright finish, it doesn't show very much with a very thin layer. There we go. I can kind of feel it thickening with my stick a little bit. Scraping down the sides so that it's really nice and smooth. Now I'm going to use a little brush here. So I'm going to brush the exterior and the interior of it to seal up these edges of the plywood. Now you can see when I put that on there, you can't see it very well at all. So if you're interested in keeping a bright finish on your coaming, it's just fine. Try to keep it as uniform as possible on here. Actually, I think of it, it might have been easier to do the inside first before I did the outside, but we can always do that on the next one. And the reason for that is that then the clamps won't be in my way. So we'll get the interior here coated. All right, now that we got that in and the outer, I want to coat the bottom of it. Fairly nice thick layer. Okay, now I've got that all coated, we can get it into place. I'm going to start up here at the bow. Get a clamp on there. Okay, we'll get the other one set up. Now, what I'm going to do differently on this one is to just do the inside, because that's where my clamps are, and I could easily go on the outside here without, once it's clamped on there. Bottom. Maybe before I put this on there, I want to get the ends done really well. The nice thing about it being that filler is it also, any kind of little imperfections, it'll fill those gaps really nicely. So now I'm going to do the outside, get it coated very nicely. Also create a little bit of a fillet here. my finger to make a little fillet there. So I'm of course going to do this side as well, so you can see how not doing the outside right away is a little more advantageous, because I still need to go along here and fill in that joint between the two. Now, I'm still going to add more clamps, if you're wondering about that. You can't put too many clamps on here. It's best if you can use a spring clamp. Any clamp will work, but you want to be careful not to tighten it too much. One of the nice things about the spring clamps is it's just the right amount of pressure. Some of you may know that with epoxy, you don't want to squeeze all of the epoxy out. You want it to be the bonding agent between the two surfaces. Again, I use my finger to make a nice fillet on there. Now we'll get more clamps on here. While the coaming lip is setting up and curing, that'll give us some time to get some fiberglass and resin on the bottom side of the coaming lip. So you can see I've laid down a piece of plastic to protect my bench, and I've got a piece of fiberglass here that I've cut to be about the right size to cover that. So what I'm going to do next is I'll mix up some resin and get that on the lip here. So I got a little epoxy mixed up here, and I'm just going to put this on with a chip brush. It's always a good idea to get any little loose hairs out of it, and sometimes you can take tape like this and dab the brush. Get some hairs out of there that might want to be loose. Now, if this was being an important fill coat, I would also take some CA glue and put along here, but it's not that critical. So what I'm going to do is get my brush loaded and then kind of tap it so that it's not dripping, and then apply it like so. Now, one of the things about epoxy, and I just recently read this on a social media post, and the person had been putting his first layer of fiberglass on, and he had used his glass had come folded. Now this glass that I'm using right here came folded, and you probably, I don't know if you can see in the light, whoops, but there's a little fold mark right here. And he could not get rid of that when he laid out the fabric. Now the reason for that was that he had primed and put a sealer coat on the surface of his kayak first. And what that does is a couple of things. One, it doesn't make the fabric want to lay as nice and flat when you stretch it out. Now, all of these epoxies are low viscosity epoxies, so they're designed to saturate the fabric and saturate the wood underneath there as well. So if you're told that you need to put a primer coat or a sealer coat on your kayak. That's not proper information. The way to do this is to simply lay your fabric out. Now on this very small piece, the fabric wants to move around, but if it was on the full hull of the kayak, it wouldn't move around very much at all. I also would be putting the epoxy on with a roller and not with a brush. But in this case, since it's a pretty small space, I'm going to use using this brush so that I can get this is plenty wide enough. Also bear in mind that this is the bottom of the lip. Looking pretty good. Make sure that I've got all of the marks out of it, which is, in this particular case, I can take the cloth and kind of stretch it a little bit like that. Okay, we're going to let that all cure, and then in the morning I'll be able to trim off this extra fiberglass off of there. And then we'll be able to fit it onto the lip for the coaming. So it's the next morning and the epoxy is cured nicely. So what I'm doing now is trimming off the extra cloth. Now if you're wondering what this boat is over my shoulder, that is the next project. And if you'd like to learn more about it, you can check this little link up here and see the video where I announce what we're going to do. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sand the edges because it still leaves a pretty sharp little piece on there. I can probably trim some of it off with my knife, but it'll come off real quick with some sandpaper. So in addition to sanding both of the edges, I'm going to also go over and give a quick sand on the top here, mainly because it's been long enough and that this is the bottom, remember, and I want to make a good mechanical bond to the coaming lip. And before I glue the lip on here, I want to go around and give this a quick sand because it's a little easier to get to it before I put that lip on. Now, of course, I want to sand the top here so I can kind of level it out where there's a couple little drips on there. Now, the other thing I'm doing is going around on the inside here. You can see, and I had mentioned this earlier, where there's this lip here. So we don't want that there. And I want to go all the way around and make sure there aren't any drips, and also to round this off just a little bit. And that's important in the next step after we glue the lip on here, that the fiberglass can wrap around that easily. So I need to take this off, and I'm doing that with my rasp. And of course, final step is to wipe it down with some denatured alcohol. So I'm going to test fit how the lip will fit on here. And it seems it's quite a bit narrower than what we have for our riser on the sides, which is no problem because we can trim that off. But the length is it's wider than the actual lip is. So you can see here where it reaches, and then back here is the same thing. So that's not an unfixable problem. All of this will need to be rounded over so that when we put the fiberglass on here, it'll transition nicely, because as many of you know, it does not like a nice sharp 90. It wants to have a smoother radius for it to go over. So these two spots I'll just be able to fill and make a little fillet in there and round that off. So I've mixed up some epoxy here, and I put some thickener in there as well. So what we'll do is get this brushed around the top of the lip. Yeah, it gets that covered, and we'll get the lip on here. Kind of trying to split the difference there. Same here. Actually, once I clamped that, it kind of came in a little bit. It's not bad at all. This way just a little bit. This lip is far more flexible than I had anticipated. A little bit up there, not bad though. Okay, get it all clamped down and let it set up. So I've got all of the clamps on here, and it's actually not very bad at the back, and I got a little squeeze out that I can fix. That'll actually round over as a fillet really nicely. There's a little bit up here you can see, so what I'm going to do is take my epoxy that I have mixed up here and just kind of fill that in a little bit. So I can get a kind of a soft radius on that. Okay, we'll let that all cure and get set up for our next step. Well, the epoxy is all set up, and I've got the clamps off, and I've taken my rasp and sort of cleaned off any major drips around the edge. So what I'm going to do now is to take a 1/4 inch round over bit and go around and round over this edge by 1/4 inch. So I did a pretty nice job of rounding that over. So I'm just going to take some 80 grit and go over it. Just clean that up a little bit. So I'm cutting some fiberglass strips here to go around the coaming, and I'm cutting them on a 45, which is called the bias. See, this is the way that the weave and the weft of the fabric is going, and the reason for this is it makes it very flexible and will go around any kind of a obstacle. And I'll show you what I mean here. If I take this piece, you can see it will stretch real easily one way or the other. And so I can actually pull that around there and it'll go right around that coaming. So I've cut several strips of this. So now what we'll do is we'll go and get it epoxied on. A little batch of epoxy mixed up here, and you can see I taped around here in case I got any drips, that I wouldn't have to deal with them later if they're on my deck. All right, so I'm going to start with this one right here. I'm going to start right in the center. I already defuzzed my brush. You'll see that I can be able to go right around. I want it to be out just past the edge of it here. Best way to do this is kind of dab, dab, dab. Otherwise you can move the fabric around too much. I want just a little bit hanging over that I can trim off. You can kind of see it, so I can move it, and then moves down and around. And make sure that I go back underneath there too. So the beauty of this is I'm not having to cut little darts in there so that it'll go around. Well, that's it for getting the coaming on here. Now I'm going to let this set up for several hours, and then I'm going to come back and put a fill coat on it so I can get a chemical bond instead of just a mechanical bond. And then it'll just be a matter of letting that cure and then trim up the outside, and we'll be ready to go. So that's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you're going to make it beautiful.